Hi, everyone. I'm Simona, and I am a Chief Engagement Officer for Pepo and OST. And I'm going to be chatting about empowerment versus power today, and really looking at the evolution of economies and how we can potentially build better ones. So without further ado, because we are on a tight schedule, here we go. So one of the main things that I want to take us through is really what are the main differences between the two concepts. So power versus empowerment, if we look at some very basic definitions, we see that power is very much geared towards a more selfish stance. It is very much around a capacity to direct and influence the behavior of others, whereas empowerment tends to be a much more, let's say, democratic, much more giving stance where authority and agency is given to somebody to do something. And so really this change of dynamics is pretty much, as far as I'm concerned, what we are all trying to do here by redesigning and re-engineering models to serve the many versus the few, and also enable and equip everybody, from individuals to communities, wherever they may be, with the tools needed for thriving. And so if we look at those individuals and communities, initially, we look at some very, very basic definitions of community, which are mostly and most of the time related to a physical space. And this is very much how communities were defined for a very long time. But what I like to draw your attention on is that third definition of ecology, which is actually a group of interdependent organisms. And this is kind of where I feel we are beginning to think back towards and also look at this interconnectivity and collaborative stances in the rebuilding of communities and economies in the Web3 world. And so what this means is we're moving towards a one-dimensional view of ourselves as humans and our roles to a three-dimensional view, to a 360-degree view. And what that leads us to is this evolution from community 1.0 to a community 3.0. And it's these communities 3.0 that will be the makers of these economies that are built for thriving. And the way I kind of look at this is an evolution that takes us from these small units, this very, very physically bordered, let's say, entities, to a 360-degree approach where we aren't just cogs in a machine and in a market, but full participants to the global processes of life. And what that does is that it brings us to these very, very interesting points where we move from, again, a position of static, very one-dimensional roles to these ingredients that are needed for thriving, because certainly we do not have these right now. And what I mean with by these, and I'll go through them very quickly, is changing the goal. So we should be moving, and I feel this is the prime moment to be moving from a GDP obsessed kind of stance to a meeting of human needs position. Moving from, a self-contained markets to embedded ecosystems by seeing the big picture. We're moving from nurturing, from these very rational economic cutouts that economy textbooks have taught us that we are, to a place of nurturing human nature, because we are actually very social. We're depending on the living world, where we're very interconnected with each other and our surroundings. Getting smart with systems is all about a ever-evolving systems and ever-evolving dynamics versus just a simple supply and demand curve. Designing to distribute, this is all about going beyond redistributing income and looking at redistributing wealth, particularly again when it comes to wealth that's in the land, in enterprise, in knowledge, in technology, and the power to create value and the power to create money. Because again, this is all about getting ourselves into a place where it's much more of a thriving dynamic versus a very power-driven one. Creating to regenerate. Clean environments, we've somehow gotten to this conclusion that they are a luxury. They're not. When we get to a really regenerative and redistributive economy model, we end up recreating and regenerating and really building these circular versus very, very linear processes, which is definitely something that we should be moving towards. And then agnostic about growth. This is something that I feel is potentially the most difficult one, but it is about creating and redesigning these economies to from a need to grow regardless of whether they make us thrive to making us thrive regardless of whether they grow or not, right? So that balance needs to be a lot more secure. And so because I mentioned the these kind of one-dimensional measurements or metrics, it gets us to this Kuznets curve, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with. There's also an environmental one that talks about those clean environments that I was talking about. And this image and this theory has been disproven, but it is still very much at the in the top kind of concepts that economic students learn. But actually, and this essentially says that inequality is a given. You have to have inequality when you have growth, but in time that peters out and it balances out. The point is, it doesn't. But what we don't realize is that actually inequality is not an economic necessity, it's a design failure. And this is a great quote from Kate Raworth, who has written about donut economies, and a lot of the content here is from a lot of the research and a lot of the writings about the fact that we need to redesign these models. And actually, we're in the prime spot to do this. This is a great snippet from Albert Nee's keynote at ETH London, one of the last in-person events that we attended. And it is incredibly exciting because it's true. This is the first time in such a long time that so many parts are available to us to be worked on, to be put in the service of rectifying these design flaws that we have kind of put up with for so long. But maybe this is the time when we can change those things and really make a difference. And so I absolutely love this quote. And what that gets us to, because we have all of these tools to play with, it gets us to the ability to build these open source circular economies. And I like to call it a recipe because I think, with all of the cooking happening during quarantine, maybe we should be cooking this. And these are the main ingredients. So modularity, and we know this from open source, but if we apply this to broader economic models, it really has the opportunity to get to systems that work because they are open source and not despite the fact that they are open source. So modularity is a key one. Parts are easy to assemble and rearrange. I think this is very, very important. And it's something that is incredibly relevant to us building software as well. Open standards, these components need to be designed to common shapes and sizes so that, again, that modularity is very, very simple and accessible. Open data, information on location and availability of material. This as an ecosystem, we have a little bit more work to do, but educating, making sure that people know what is available, where it is, and how, have those instructions there is incredibly important to come back to that empowerment piece, right? We shouldn't be hoarding them. We should bring them to the light and make them very, very accessible and readily available. And then transparency, of course, allowing for improvement and adaptation of that recipe. And this, again, is all about empowerment, being able to have all of those moving parts and adapt them to your specific needs, to your specific problems, to your specific communities is incredibly important. And this, again, is something that we need to keep in mind when we are creating and reshaping current models. And so what we get to is a flow of networks. By enabling this open source economy redesign, we get to this point, which actually is incredibly relevant to us in Ethereum and in Web3. It is this network of flows, because a distributed network, you have a much more equitable distribution of income and wealth, and being able to map everything to this and to these flows is going to benefit us all, and again will put us in that thriving mode versus the usual linear top-down kind of dynamic that we have gotten used to, but really we're all hating and wanted to change, because that's why we're here. And so with all of these things in mind, with all of these principles and all of these recipes, and the fact that we are ready for these things to happen, we get ourselves into this regenerative by design economy. So right now we have that very linear flow without the lovely wings of regenerate and restore. We just have take, make, consume, use, and that's it. And so by enabling these wings, by enabling these extra elements that really should be there because they are part of natural systems. Again, we forget we're part of nature. We're like nature. So these are the natural flows that we should be replicating in our economies. And what that means is sustainability, right? Communities can implement those solutions based on those local needs and resources. The focus on thriving, we get to a place where we aren't obsessed with growth at all costs, which, by the way, no economist has ever looked at what that diagram looks like, because really where does that get us? Exponential growth all the time ad infinitum really isn't sustainable. And then resilience. So one of the main things that we have seen time and time again, and yet again, we are in this place with the current situation, we just do not have resilient systems. So increasing diversity boosts resilience. And I put there biomimicry, which is a concept that's been used by Robert Dulanovich and Janine Benyus. And it's a very, very important piece, because actually this diversity really is key. And it's something that we do not have, particularly when it comes to our monetary situation, which is a monetary monoculture that we have been perpetuating for way too long. And I want to give this example because I want to show you a very, very simple illustration of why diversity means resilience and why we should be, doing our utmost to promote diversity. The panda only eats one type of bamboo, and it's been on the endangered list for a good many years. The gray squirrel, on the other hand, eats anything. It will eat bugs, it will eat nuts, it will eat, I don't know if you're in New York in Central Park, maybe it will eat a whole bunch of other paraphernalia, but it's doing incredibly well because it has a diverse diet. So diversifying really does make organisms and systems much more resilient. And what we get to by this diversifying of not just, value and how we define value, but also the monetary culture, or breaking that monetary monoculture that we are in right now. So diversifying value, again, we have been so obsessed with money is the only way to measure value. But actually, if we diversify the different types of value that we take into account and that we guide our transactions by: the human value, the social, the ecological, the cultural, the physical. There are so many more. And breaking the monetary monoculture, again, is about breaking that monopoly of the current currencies that we use, and then redesigning currencies, not just money flows. This is, again, a very important piece. And again, it puts us in prime position to be looking at a finance in the service of life, not life in the service of finance. And I want to just cover a couple of these complementary currencies, because actually, breaking this monetary monoculture has a lot to do with diversifying currencies and diversifying how we structure currencies and how we produce them and how we interact with them and how we transact with them. So these are two great examples, and please feel free to research them further. There are many others, by the way, but the Swiss Weir is a great example. Created in 1934, it was to be between 16 people. They were all owners of businesses, and they decided to have this complementary currency working alongside the Swiss franc. It's several peer-reviewed papers are, assigning Switzerland's thriving stability to its existence. And then the Torquez is another great example in the Rabot district of Ghent, where again, it wasn't a thriving community. And so this was introduced to exist at the same time with the euro, but the, spending within the community was done with Torquez, and then the euro was used for things like taxes and bills. Very, very important. And again, a very interesting way of diversifying currencies and diversifying money, so that we aren't constantly in the situation of all eggs in one basket, which again, clearly is not a resilient thing to do. And I want to leave you with this meme, because again, we love a meme. And this is actually, the metagame team came up with this, but I think it's a great illustration of this evolution from power to empowerment, from a very static economic cutout and a very selfish stance to a much more thriving stance. And it gets us to this Homoeconomicus, which actually is a persona in economic studies that is very, very focused on this monetary side of things, and is very, very focused on growth at all cost. And then you have the meta sapien, who is very much about being part of a community, being using their skills and their value that they put out for the betterment of the whole. And it's very much focused on this redesign for thriving. So I think these are the main things that I wanted to touch on. And again, I will say that we are in this very, very fruitful time. And I know we sometimes get sidetracked, and I know we sometimes focus on the wrong thing. But if we keep these principles and these elements at the forefront of our mind when we build things and when we create things, it really puts us in this incredible place of redesigning things for thriving. No longer the same models where we constantly deal with crises, we constantly deal with inequality, and it's an opportunity that for decades we haven't had it, yet here it is now. So I would like to thank you so much. And here is where you can find me. I would love to continue these conversations. I think they're incredibly important. Thank you, Ethereal. And Ethereal Virtual is looking good so far. So congratulations, team. And thank you very much.